The dust cloud rising from the wagon wheels caught the afternoon sun like a warning as Natalie Harper pressed her trembling hands against the rough wood beneath her, trying to steady herself as her father drove toward a fate she could not yet imagine. She had known for 3 weeks that this day would come, ever since the crops failed completely and the bank threatened to take everything they had left. Her father, once a proud farmer in Missouri, had gambled away what little remained on a foolish venture west, dragging Natalie and her younger brother Thomas across the plains with promises of gold and opportunity. Instead, they found nothing but debt and desperation in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming in the late summer of 1878. The town of Rawlins sprawled before them now, a collection of weathered buildings and false-fronted stores that seemed to mock their circumstances with every creaking sign and dusty street. "Papa, please," Natalie whispered, though she knew her words would change nothing. At 22 years old, she had long ago learned that her father heard only what he wanted to hear, and right now he heard only the promises of the man who had offered him a way out. Marcus Harper did not look at his daughter. His weathered face remained fixed on the road ahead, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles working beneath his sun-damaged skin. "It is settled, Natalie. Garrett needs a wife, and we need horses and supplies to make it through the winter. Thomas is only 14. Would you have him starve?" The words cut through her like the Wyoming wind that never seemed to stop blowing across these harsh plains. She wanted to scream that there had to be another way, that selling his own daughter to a cattle rancher, twice her age, was not the answer to their problems, but the hollow look in her brother's eyes when she glanced back at him in the wagon bed told her everything she needed to know. Thomas was already too thin, his clothes hanging loose on his growing frame. Without help, they would not survive. The Garrett Ranch sat on the outskirts of Rawlins, a sprawling operation that spoke of wealth accumulated through means Natalie did not care to contemplate. Cattle grazed across acres of fenced pasture, and the main house rose 2 full stories with a wraparound porch that would have been impressive anywhere, let alone in this rough territory. Men worked in the corrals and barns, their eyes following the Harper wagon as it rolled up the dirt drive with the kind of knowing looks that made Natalie's stomach turn. Lawrence Garrett emerged from the house before they even came to a full stop. He was a thick-built man in his late 40s with graying hair and cold eyes that assessed Natalie like she was livestock he was considering purchasing. Behind him stood 2 other men, ranch hands by their dress, and between them, Natalie saw something that made her blood run cold. 4 horses stood tied to the porch rail, their saddles laden with bags and bundles that could only be supplies. The price of her freedom, already prepared and waiting. "Harper!" Garrett called out, his voice carrying the flat tone of a man conducting business. "You brought her." It was not a question. Natalie felt her father's hand on her arm, pulling her down from the wagon seat with more force than necessary. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, whether from the long ride or from fear she could not say. Thomas moved to follow her, but their father shook his head sharply, commanding the boy to stay put. "As we agreed," Marcus Harper said, straightening his shoulders in a pathetic attempt at dignity. "My daughter Natalie, 22 years old, healthy and able to work. She can cook, clean, and handle livestock. You will find her a good wife." The way Garrett's eyes traveled over her made Natalie feel exposed despite the modest dress that covered her from neck to ankles. "We will see about that. Come here, girl." She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and flee, but where would she go? The endless plains stretched in all directions, and she had no horse, no supplies, no means of survival. Slowly, she stepped forward, keeping her brown eyes fixed on the ground, as her mother had taught her years ago, before illness took her and left Natalie alone to manage a household, while her father's decisions grew increasingly reckless. Garrett grabbed her chin, tilting her face up roughly to examine her in the harsh sunlight. His hands smelled of tobacco and leather, and his breath was hot and sour when he leaned close. "Pretty enough, I suppose. Good teeth. Can you read?" "Yes, sir," Natalie managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is useless out here, but no matter. Can you bear children?" The question struck her like a physical blow, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. Before she could formulate any response, her father answered for her. "She is perfectly healthy. There is no reason she could not." "Papa," she breathed, horrified, but he would not meet her eyes. Garrett released her chin and stepped back, nodding slowly. Very well. The horses and supplies are yours, Harper. Consider your debt to me paid. He gestured to one of his men, who began untying the horses. I will draw up papers making the marriage legal by week's end. Until then, she stays here. Everything was happening too fast. Natalie watched as if from a great distance as her father accepted the lead ropes of the horses, as Thomas was handed down from the wagon and told to help load the supplies into the bed. Her brother's eyes found hers, swimming with tears he was too young to hide, and she tried to smile at him, tried to convey that everything would somehow be all right, even though she knew it was a lie. "Take care of him," she called out as her father climbed back into the wagon seat. "Papa, please, take care of Thomas." Marcus Harper finally looked at her then, and she saw something flicker in his expression, guilt perhaps, or regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You are doing the right thing, Natalie, for the family." Then he snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled away, taking her brother and her old life with it. Natalie stood frozen in place, watching until the dust cloud swallowed them completely, aware of Garrett's presence behind her like a storm about to break. "Come inside," he ordered. "I will show you where you will be sleeping." The next 3 days passed in a blur of misery. Garrett's house was well appointed but cold, lacking any of the warmth that turned a building into a home. He showed her to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over the ranch yard. The door had a lock, and he made a point of showing her that he held the only key. Her duties, he explained in that same flat voice, would include cooking, cleaning, and eventually sharing his bed once they were properly married. If she tried to run, he told her, he would hunt her down and make sure her father and brother paid the price for her disobedience. Natalie spent those first nights crying into the thin pillow, mourning the life she had lost, and dreading the one that awaited her. During the days, she moved through the house like a ghost, preparing meals from the well-stocked kitchen and trying to avoid the knowing looks of the ranch hands when they came in to eat. Garrett left her mostly alone, busy with ranch business, but she could feel his eyes on her whenever he was near, assessing and calculating. On the 4th day, Garrett announced that he needed to ride into town to file the marriage papers and conduct some business. He would be taking most of his men with him, he said, leaving only a skeleton crew to watch the ranch and watch her. The way he emphasized those last 2 words made his meaning clear. Natalie stood on the porch that morning and watched the group of riders head toward Rawlins, led by Garrett on his large bay horse. The dust had barely settled before she felt the weight of the remaining ranch hands' attention. There were 3 of them, rough men who made her skin crawl with their leering grins. She retreated inside and locked herself in her room, pushing the single chair against the door for good measure. Hours passed, the sun climbed high and began its descent toward the western horizon. Natalie dozed fitfully on the bed, exhausted from 3 nights of poor sleep and emotional turmoil. When she woke, the shadows were growing long, and she could hear voices raised in excitement from somewhere below. Cautiously, she moved the chair and cracked open the door, listening. "I am telling you, there is at least 6 of them," one of the ranch hands was saying, his voice carrying up the stairs. "Good horses, too. That cowboy has got himself a nice string." "Well, Garrett would pay top dollar for quality horse flesh," another voice replied. "Think we should try to convince him to sell?" "Not likely. He was pretty clear he was just passing through, needed to rest the animals before pushing on toward the mountains. Said he would be gone by morning." Natalie's heart began to pound. A traveler with horses meant someone from outside this nightmare, someone who might not know about Garrett's arrangement with her father. It was a foolish hope, but it was the first she had felt in days. She moved quietly down the stairs, trying to appear casual as she entered the kitchen, where the 3 men sat around the table. "I should start preparing supper," she said softly, keeping her eyes downcast. The men ignored her, continuing their conversation. "Boss said to make sure the girl does not go wandering. That cowboy might get ideas if he sees her." "Garrett does not share," the 3rd man said with a mean laugh. "Not even a look." Natalie moved about the kitchen, pulling out supplies for a simple meal while her mind raced. A traveler with horses, passing through, gone by morning. The words repeated in her head like a prayer. She did not know what she could possibly say or do, but the thought of letting this chance slip away felt like letting go of life itself. Dinner was a quiet affair. The ranch hands ate quickly and then retreated outside to smoke and play cards in the bunkhouse, leaving Natalie to clean up. Through the kitchen window, she could see the barn where the travelers' horses were presumably stabled for the night. No smoke rose from the chimney of the small guest cabin that sat near the main barn, so perhaps the man was eating in town or taking his rest. Darkness fell like a curtain across the ranch. Natalie finished her chores and climbed the stairs to her room, but she did not prepare for sleep. Instead, she sat by the window and watched, waiting for any sign of the mysterious traveler. The moon rose fat and bright, casting silver light across the ranch yard, and in that ghostly illumination, she finally saw him. He emerged from the barn leading one of his horses, a tall figure in a long coat and wide-brimmed hat. Even from a distance, she could see he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He stopped in the yard, looking up at the night sky, and for just a moment, the moonlight caught his face. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with strong features and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Before she could talk herself out of it, Natalie opened her window. "Please," she called out softly, desperately hoping her voice would carry without alerting the men in the bunkhouse. "Please, help me." The cowboy's head snapped around, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. His eyes found her window, and even in the darkness, she could see the tension in his posture. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still, calculating. Then slowly, he raised one hand in acknowledgement and gestured for her to wait. He led his horse back into the barn, and Natalie held her breath, wondering if he would actually return or if she had just made a terrible mistake. Minutes crawled by. Then she heard the softest of sounds at her door, the careful scrape of metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock. She stepped back, suddenly terrified that it was one of the ranch hands come to silence her. But when the door swung open, it was the cowboy who slipped inside, closing it quickly behind him. Up close, he was even younger than she had thought, perhaps 25 or 26 at most, with sharp blue eyes that assessed her, and the room with the same keen attention he had given the night sky. He held a finger to his lips, cautioning silence, then moved to the window to check the yard below. Apparently satisfied, he turned to face her fully. "Who are you, and why are you locked in this room?" His voice was low and steady, with the slight drawl of someone raised in Texas or perhaps Oklahoma territory. Natalie found herself suddenly unsure how to explain her situation. How did one tell a complete stranger that her own father had sold her like property? "My name is Natalie Harper," she began, wrapping her arms around herself. "4 days ago, my father traded me to the man who owns this ranch in exchange for horses and supplies. He is in town now filing papers to make me his wife, but I do not want this. I did not have a choice." The cowboy's expression hardened, and she saw his jaw clench in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of her father. But where her father's anger had always felt selfish and directed at the world's unfairness to him, this man's anger seemed different, somehow righteous. "Lawrence Garrett," he said, and it was not a question. "You know him?" "I know of him. His reputation reaches beyond Rawlins." The cowboy removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "My name is Kane Northfield. I am a horse trader working my way through Wyoming before winter sets in. I had no idea Garrett was in the business of buying women." "Trading," Natalie corrected bitterly. 4 horses and enough supplies to keep my father and brother from starving. That is what I am worth." Kane's blue eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that surprised her. Genuine compassion. "That is not your worth, Miss Harper. That is your father's shame." The words nearly broke her. She had held herself together for days, but this stranger's kindness cracked something inside her, and she felt tears begin to spill down her cheeks. She wiped at them angrily, frustrated by her own weakness. "I am sorry. I should not have called out to you. You have your own business to attend to, and getting involved in Garrett's affairs could be dangerous." "Let me worry about danger," Kane said quietly. He moved back to the door, listening for any sound of movement in the house. "When does Garrett return from town?" "I do not know. Possibly late tonight, possibly tomorrow morning." Kane nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "The way I see it, Miss Harper, you have 2 choices. You can stay here and accept the life Garrett has planned for you, or you can come with me right now. If you choose the second option, you need to understand what that means. Garrett will come after us. Your father will claim I stole you, which could mean legal trouble or worse. We would have to ride hard and fast, and I cannot promise where we would end up or what would happen along the way." Natalie stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would help me? Just like that? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Kane replied. "I know that no woman should be treated as property. I know that what your father did was wrong, and what Garrett is planning is worse. I have 6 good horses, plenty of supplies, and a route planned through the mountains. If you want out, I am offering you that chance." It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was possibly the most foolish decision she could make. But as Natalie looked into Kane Northfield's steady blue eyes, she felt something she had not felt since her father first told her of his plans. Hope. "I will come with you," she said. Kane nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Do you have anything you need to take? Be quick, and only what you can carry easily." Natalie had almost nothing to her name. She grabbed her mother's silver locket from the small table beside the bed, the only possession that truly mattered, and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. "I am ready." "Stay close and stay quiet," Kane instructed. He eased the door open and checked the hallway. The house remained dark and silent. They moved together through the shadows, Kane leading the way with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to moving unnoticed. When they reached the stairs, Natalie's heart hammered so hard she was certain it would give them away, but the old wood held firm beneath their careful steps. The front door posed the biggest risk. Kane examined it carefully, then slowly lifted the heavy wooden bar that served as a lock. The scrape of wood on wood seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house, and they both froze, waiting for shouts or footsteps. Nothing came. Kane pulled the door open just wide enough for them to slip through, then closed it behind them with aching slowness. The ranch yard stretched before them, painted in moonlight and shadow. The bunkhouse sat dark, but Natalie could see the glow of a cigarette near the door, where one of the hands was keeping watch. Kane saw it too. He took her hand, his grip warm and solid, and led her along the side of the house, using the deep shadows to mask their movement. They circled wide around the yard, moving toward the barn from an angle that kept the building between them and the bunkhouse. Inside the barn, the horses stirred at their entrance, huffing softly. Kane moved quickly now, speaking in low tones as he saddled 2 of his horses. He worked with efficient precision, clearly a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Natalie stood near the door, keeping watch, her whole body trembling with fear and adrenaline. "Can you ride?" Kane asked, leading the horses toward her. "Yes," Natalie said, though it had been years since she had done so with any regularity. "Good, this is Sage. She has a sweet temperament and will take care of you." He handed her the reins of a dappled gray mare with kind eyes. "We are going to walk them out of the yard as quietly as possible. Once we are clear of the ranch, we ride hard. Do not look back, do not stop for anything. If we get separated, head northwest toward the mountains. There is a line of cottonwood trees about 5 miles from here that follows a creek. Wait for me there. Understood?" Natalie nodded, unable to find her voice. This was really happening. She was really leaving. Kane led his own mount, a tall black gelding, and took Sage's reins from Natalie so she would have her hands free. They walked the horses out of the barn, every footfall feeling like thunder in Natalie's ears. The guard at the bunkhouse had disappeared inside, a stroke of luck that felt like divine intervention. They made it to the edge of the yard, then beyond, putting the ranch buildings behind them. When they were perhaps 100 yards out, Kane handed Sage's reins back to Natalie. "Mount up," he said quietly. She grabbed the saddle horn and pulled herself up, grateful for the years of farm work that had kept her strong. The mare stood steady beneath her, patient with her slightly clumsy movements. Kane swung into his own saddle with the grace of someone born to it. "Ready?" he asked. Natalie looked back one last time at the ranch, at the prison she was leaving behind. Then she looked at Kane, at this stranger who was risking everything to give her freedom. "Ready." They rode. The first few miles passed in a blur of pounding hooves and rushing wind. Kane set a hard pace, and Natalie focused all her attention on staying in the saddle and keeping up. The Wyoming landscape rolled past in shades of silver and black, the moonlight turning the prairie grass into a ghostly sea. Behind them, she heard no sounds of pursuit, but she knew it was only a matter of time. They reached the cottonwoods just as the first hints of dawn began to gray the eastern sky. The trees rose like ancient sentinels along the creek bed, their leaves rustling in the constant wind. Kane finally slowed their pace, guiding his horse down the shallow bank to the water. The animals drank gratefully while Kane dismounted and moved back up the bank, scanning the horizon behind them. Natalie slid from Sage's back, her legs trembling from the hard ride. She had not ridden like that in years, and she knew she would pay for it in aches and pains. But they were away. They had actually escaped. Kane returned to her side, his expression serious. "We need to keep moving. Garrett's men will find the signs of our passage as soon as the sun is up. We have maybe an hour's head start, possibly less." "Where are we going?" Natalie asked. "Deeper into the mountains," Kane said. "There are old mining camps and trails that will make us harder to track. If we can stay ahead of them for a few days, Garrett might give up the chase. His influence does not extend much beyond Rawlins and the immediate territory." "And if he does not give up?" Kane met her eyes steadily. "Then we keep running until he does." They remounted and pushed on, following the creek northwest as it climbed gradually into the foothills. The sun rose in brilliant gold and orange, illuminating the rugged beauty of the Wyoming landscape. Despite her exhaustion and fear, Natalie found herself awed by the sheer wildness of it, the sense of space and possibility that seemed to stretch forever. Kane proved to be an excellent guide, finding game trails and rocky paths that would obscure their tracks. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and allow them to graze. During one of these stops, Kane pulled dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags and offered half to Natalie. "Not much of a meal," he apologized. "It is perfect," Natalie said, and she meant it. The simple food tasted better than anything she had eaten at Garrett's ranch, flavored as it was with freedom. As they ate, she studied Kane more carefully in the daylight. He had a weathered quality despite his relative youth, the result of years spent outdoors in all kinds of weather. His hands were strong and capable, scarred from work and life. He wore practical clothing, nothing fancy, but everything well-made and well-maintained. His gun belt sat comfortably on his hips, the weapon clearly no stranger to his hand. But it was his eyes that struck her most, those sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything and judge little. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have just ridden away this morning, avoided all this trouble." Kane considered the question while he chewed, then swallowed and took a drink from his canteen. "My sister was 15 when a man tried to buy her from my father. This was years ago, back in Texas. My father said no, but the man did not take that for an answer. He tried to take her anyway." His expression darkened at the memory. "I was 17, barely knew which end of a gun to point, but I stopped him. My father ran him off our land, and we never saw him again. I swore then that if I ever saw someone in a similar situation, I would do what I could to help." "Your sister? Is she all right now?" A smile crossed Kane's face, transforming it. "She is married to a good man, has 3 children, and runs a boarding house in San Antonio. She is the strongest person I know." Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You come from a good family. I come from a family that believes people matter more than property or pride. That is not the same as good, maybe, but it is something." Kane stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "We should move on. Are you managing all right? I know this pace is not easy." "I will manage," Natalie said, forcing herself to her feet despite the protest of her muscles. "Whatever it takes." They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The terrain grew more challenging, the trails narrower and steeper. Ponderosa pines began to appear among the cottonwoods, and the air took on the sharp, clean scent of altitude. Natalie's whole body ached, but she refused to complain or ask Kane to slow their pace. Every mile between them and Garrett felt like a small victory. As evening approached, Kane led them off the main trail to a sheltered hollow, surrounded by rocks and thick pine trees. A small spring bubbled from the ground, creating a clear pool before trickling away down the mountain. "We will camp here tonight," Kane announced. "The cover is good, and we can have a small fire without it being visible from below. The horses need real rest, and so do you." Natalie wanted to argue that she was fine, but her body betrayed her by swaying slightly when she dismounted. Kane caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy, you did well today. Better than most would manage after years without serious riding." "I feel like I have been beaten with sticks," Natalie admitted. "That is about right," Kane said with a slight smile. "It will be worse tomorrow, but by the 3rd day you will start to adjust. I have some salve that might help with the soreness." While Kane tended to the horses, removing their saddles and rubbing them down with practiced care, Natalie gathered wood for a fire. She found herself watching him work, noting the gentle way he spoke to the animals, the thoroughness of his attention. These horses were clearly more than just property to him. They were partners in his livelihood and companions in his travels. The fire caught quickly, and soon a small, almost smokeless flame crackled in the ring of stones Kane arranged. He produced more food from his seemingly bottomless saddlebags: coffee, beans, bacon, and even a small pan to cook in. The smell of coffee brewing was enough to make Natalie's mouth water. As they sat by the fire eating their simple dinner, the reality of her situation began to settle over Natalie in waves. She was in the mountains with a stranger, running from a dangerous man with no plan beyond escaping. Her father and brother believed she was about to become Garrett's wife, assuming the ceremony had already taken place. For all she knew, Garrett might be calling her a thief and a runaway, turning her into a criminal in the eyes of the law. "You are thinking too much," Kane observed quietly. "I can see it in your face." "How can I not think? I have made you a criminal by leaving with you. Garrett could claim you kidnapped me. Let him claim what he wants. Your father sold you like property, and that is wrong no matter what the law might say about it. Any judge with sense would see that." Kane poured coffee into a battered tin cup and handed it to her. "But you are right that we need a plan beyond just running. Once we are safely away from Garrett's reach, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go?" The question caught her off guard. "I do not know. I never thought beyond escaping." "Do you have family besides your father and brother? Somewhere you could go?" Natalie shook her head. "My mother's people are back in Missouri, but we were never close. They did not approve of my father, and they broke ties when my mother married him. I would not even know how to find them now." Kane nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "Well, I am headed to Colorado eventually. I have a business partner there who runs a ranch outside of Denver. We breed and train horses together, though I do the traveling and he manages the day-to-day operations. It is not much, but there is always work there for someone willing to learn. You would be welcome to come along, at least until you figure out your next step." The offer was generous, perhaps too generous. Natalie studied Kane's profile in the firelight, trying to understand this man who had risked so much for a stranger. "Why would you do that? You have already done so much." "Because you need help, and I can provide it. It does not need to be more complicated than that." Kane met her eyes, and she saw nothing but sincerity in his expression. "I am not asking anything from you, Miss Harper. No payment, no obligations. Just offering a place to land until you find your footing." Tears pricked at Natalie's eyes for the second time that night, but these were different from the tears of despair she had shed in Garrett's house. "I do not know how to thank you. Stay alive and stay free. That is thanks enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and listening to the night sounds of the mountains. Owls called in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. The horses stood contentedly nearby, their forms dark shadows against the trees. "Tell me about your mother," Kane said eventually. "You mentioned her locket earlier." Natalie pulled the silver locket from her pocket, opening it to reveal the tiny portrait inside. Even in the firelight, her mother's gentle face was visible, captured in miniature by an artist years ago. "She was the kindest person I ever knew. She died when I was 16, consumption. After that, my father started to fall apart. He made bad decisions, gambled, drank. It was like losing her broke something in him, and he could not figure out how to put it back together. That must have been hard on you and your brother. Thomas barely remembers her anymore. I think that is worse somehow. At least I have memories." Natalie closed the locket carefully. "She would have been horrified by what my father tried to do. She would never have allowed it." "No," Kane agreed. "I do not think she would have." The conversation drifted to other topics, safer ones. Kane told her about his travels, about the different territories he had seen and the people he had met. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures with his words, and Natalie found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. There was something steady about Kane Northfield, something solid and trustworthy that made her feel safer than she had any right to feel given their circumstances. When the fire burned down to embers, Kane spread out bedrolls on opposite sides of the small camp, giving her privacy and space. "Get some sleep," he advised. "I will keep first watch. Make sure we have no visitors." Natalie lay down on the bedroll, the thin blanket pulled up to her chin. The ground was hard and cold, so different from any bed she had ever known, but exhaustion dragged at her like an anchor. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard Kane moving quietly around the camp, checking the horses one more time, adding a few sticks to the fire. The sounds were oddly comforting, and she fell asleep feeling more secure than she had since her mother died. She woke once in the deep hours of night to find Kane sitting by the fire, his back to her, keeping his vigil. The sight of his silhouette against the stars made something warm settle in her chest, a feeling she could not quite name but did not want to lose. The next day brought the soreness Kane had predicted. Natalie woke to find every muscle screaming in protest, her legs and back particularly unhappy with the previous day's exertion. She forced herself up anyway, determined not to slow them down. Kane noticed her careful movements but said nothing, simply offering her the salve he had mentioned, and then discreetly turning his attention to breaking camp while she applied it. They were in the saddle again within an hour, climbing still higher into the mountains. The landscape grew more dramatic with every mile, great stone formations rising around them and valleys dropping away to dizzying depths. Kane navigated the trails with confidence, clearly familiar with mountain travel. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses near a high meadow, carpeted with late summer wildflowers. While the animals grazed, Kane suddenly went very still, his hand moving to his rifle. Natalie followed his gaze and saw what had caught his attention: dust rising from the trail below them, indicating riders. "How many?" she whispered. "Hard to say. At least 4, maybe more." Kane's jaw tightened. "Could be anyone, but we cannot take chances. We need to move, now." They mounted quickly, Kane leading them not back to the trail, but across the meadow and into the thick pine forest beyond. The trees provided cover, but made for difficult riding, low branches grabbing at their clothes and the uneven ground treacherous for the horses. They pushed through anyway, putting distance between themselves and the trail. An hour later, they emerged onto another trail higher up the mountain. Kane paused, studying the terrain carefully. If those were Garrett's men, they will be checking every side trail and camp spot. We need to get off the main routes completely, take paths that most people do not know about. Do you know paths like that? Some. I have been through these mountains before, though not this exact area. Kane pointed toward a distant peak. There is an old mining camp up near the timberline. It was abandoned years ago, but the route up might still be passable. If we can reach it, we could hold up there for a few days, let Garrett's men wear themselves out searching lower down. It was risky, but staying on the main trails seemed riskier. Natalie nodded her agreement, and they turned their horses toward the distant peak. The climb was brutal. The trail, such as it was, switched back and forth up the mountainside, sometimes narrowing to barely more than a ledge with sheer drops on one side. Natalie's fear of heights warred with her fear of capture, and capture won. She kept her eyes on Sage's neck and trusted the mare to find her footing. They reached the mining camp as the sun was setting, exhausted and hungry. The camp consisted of several collapsed buildings and one structure that still had most of its roof intact, probably an old bunkhouse. Kane checked it carefully for structural soundness and animal occupants before declaring it safe enough for shelter. The interior was rough, just bare wooden walls and a stone fireplace. But after 2 nights on the ground, it felt like luxury. There was even a stack of old firewood in one corner, dry and ready to burn. Kane started a fire in the fireplace while Natalie investigated the rest of the small building. She found a few rusted mining tools, some broken furniture, and evidence that someone else had sheltered here not too long ago, perhaps within the last year. "Looks like we are not the first to use this place as a hideout," she reported to Kane. "These old camps see all kinds of visitors," Kane said. "Miners, hunters, outlaws, people like us. The mountains do not judge." He spread out their bedrolls near the fire and began preparing another simple meal. "We should be safe here for tonight at least. Tomorrow I will scout the area, see if I can tell whether those riders were really Garrett's men or just travelers." They ate in silence, both too tired for much conversation. When Natalie moved to help clean up after the meal, Kane waved her off. "You are practically asleep sitting up. Lie down. I have got this." She wanted to argue but found she could not. Her body had reached its limit. She collapsed onto the bedroll and was asleep almost instantly. Kane watched her sleep for a moment, this brave woman who had trusted him enough to flee into the mountains. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had made her a promise when he helped her escape, an implicit promise to see her safely away from Garrett, and he intended to keep it no matter what it cost him. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Kane would leave at dawn to scout, returning with reports of continued activity on the trails below. Garrett's men, for that was surely who they were conducting a systematic search of the area. They had not given up. Meanwhile, Natalie worked on making their temporary shelter more livable, cleaning out debris, organizing their supplies, and even managing to catch fish from a nearby stream using techniques her father had taught her years ago. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, the two began to truly know each other. Kane told her more about his life, about growing up in Texas and learning the horse trade from his father, about the decision to move north into Wyoming and Colorado, where the business opportunities were better. He spoke about his dreams of building something lasting, a ranch that bred the finest horses in the territory. Natalie, in turn, shared her own stories. She told him about her childhood before her mother's death, about learning to read from traveling preachers and developing a love of books that her father had always considered frivolous. She spoke about the gradual deterioration of her family after her mother's passing, about taking on more and more responsibility as her father retreated into his vices. She told him about Thomas, about her fears for her brother's future with a father who could not be trusted. "He is a good boy," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Smart, kinder than he has any right to be given how our father treats him. I worry that I abandoned him by leaving." "You did not abandon him," Kane said firmly. "You saved yourself from a terrible fate. That is not the same thing." "But what if my father cannot care for him properly? What if something happens?" Kane was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Your father made his choice when he traded you away. That shows what kind of man he is. The best thing you can do for your brother is survive, build a life for yourself, and be there when he is old enough to make his own choices. If he comes looking for you someday, you can help him then." The words were harsh but true. Natalie knew that sacrificing herself would not have saved Thomas, would not have made her father a better man. Still, the guilt gnawed at her. On the 4th day at the mining camp, Kane returned from his morning scout with unexpected news. "They are pulling back," he said. "Garrett's men. I watched them ride back toward Rawlins. Could be a trick, but I do not think so. They looked frustrated, like they had given up." "So we are safe?" "Safer," Kane corrected. "Garrett might still be looking, but if his men have given up the mountain search, it means we can start moving again. We should head deeper into Colorado, put more distance between us and Rawlins." They packed up that afternoon and began the descent from the mining camp. The journey down was almost as treacherous as the climb had been, requiring all their concentration. By evening, they had reached lower elevations, and Kane led them to a proper campsite beside a rushing river. As they made camp, Natalie found herself watching Kane with growing awareness. Over the past week, he had become more than just her rescuer. He had become a companion, someone she trusted implicitly, someone whose presence made her feel safe and valued. She noticed small things about him, the way he smiled when the horses did something amusing, the careful way he rationed their supplies to make sure they would have enough, the patience he showed when teaching her better riding techniques. She was developing feelings for him, she realized with a start. Real feelings, not the gratitude or dependency she might have expected, but genuine affection and attraction. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. After everything she had been through, after nearly being forced into a marriage with a man she despised, the idea of opening her heart was frightening. That night, as they sat by the fire, Kane seemed quieter than usual. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Harper, Natalie, I need to tell you something." Her heart clenched. Was he going to tell her that they needed to part ways? That he had fulfilled his obligation and she was on her own now? "When I offered to help you, I did it because it was the right thing to do. I did not expect anything in return, and I still do not. But I think you should know that these past days with you have been the best I have had in a long time." Kane looked at her directly, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are brave and strong, and you deserve a life filled with choices, with freedom, with happiness. When we reach Colorado, when you are settled and safe, I want you to know that you will have options. You can work at the ranch, or we can help you find something else if you prefer. Whatever you want. What if what I want is to stay with you?" The words were out before Natalie could stop them, bold and honest. Kane went very still. "You do not have to say that. You do not owe me anything." I know I do not owe you. That is not why I said it. Natalie's heart pounded, but she forced herself to continue. Kane, you gave me my life back, but more than that, you have shown me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness. You have made me laugh and feel safe and remember what it is like to have hope. If those are not reasons to want to stay near someone, I do not know what are. Natalie, Kane said, her name a rough whisper. You have been through so much. Your feelings might be confused right now, gratitude mixed up with something else. I would not want you to make a decision you would regret later. Do you want me to stay? She asked directly. Yes, Kane admitted. More than I should, probably. But I want you to be sure. Natalie stood and moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I cannot be sure of anything right now except this. I feel safer and happier with you than I have felt in years. Is that enough to start with? Kane turned to look at her, and she saw in his face that he was fighting the same battle she was. The desire to reach for something good, warring with the fear of moving too fast, of taking advantage. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. His palm was warm and rough against her skin. It is enough, he said quietly, and then he kissed her. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a question rather than a demand. Natalie answered by leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart beating hard beneath her palm, as rapid as her own. The kiss deepened, became more sure, and Natalie felt something spark to life inside her, something she had thought Garrett might have killed forever. The ability to feel desire without fear. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. We should take this slow, he said. You have been through so much, and I do not want to rush you into anything. I know, Natalie said, but Kane, I also know that slow can be good. We have time now. That is the gift you gave me. Time to figure things out, time to heal, time to choose. They sat together by the fire, long into the night, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. When they finally retreated to their separate bedrolls, Natalie felt lighter than she had in months, as if some heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The journey to Colorado took 2 more weeks. They traveled at a more leisurely pace now that the immediate threat had passed, following rivers and valleys south and west. The landscape changed gradually, the stark mountains of Wyoming giving way to Colorado's more varied terrain. During those 2 weeks, Natalie and Kane grew closer. They talked constantly, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. Kane taught her more about horses, about how to read their moods and what to look for in good breeding stock. Natalie shared her love of stories, recounting books she had read and tales her mother had told her. They laughed together at small things, the horse's antics, the beauty of a sunset, the absurdity of trying to cook over a campfire in the wind. They also kissed again, several times, always carefully, always with respect for the boundaries they had set. Each kiss felt like a promise, like they were building something real and lasting brick by brick. They reached Kane's ranch on a bright afternoon in early October of 1878. The property sat in a valley with mountains rising on 3 sides, protected from the worst winds and blessed with good water from a clear stream. The main house was modest but well built, and several pastures held horses of varying ages, all of them showing the quality Kane had promised. A man emerged from the house as they rode up, tall and lean, with gray threading through his dark hair. Kane Northfield, he called out. You are 3 weeks later than you said you would be. I was starting to think you had gotten yourself killed. Nothing so dramatic, Kane replied, swinging down from his saddle. Just some unexpected complications. Marcus, I want you to introduce you to someone. Marcus's eyes found Natalie, and she saw his expression shift from curiosity to understanding. Complications? He repeated dryly. Is that what we are calling it now? This is Natalie Harper, Kane continued, ignoring his partner's tone. She will be staying with us for a while, helping with the ranch work if she is willing. Natalie, this is Marcus Daniels. He is the business partner I mentioned, and he owns this property. Marcus stepped forward and removed his hat politely. Miss Harper, any friend of Kane's is welcome here. Over the next few days, Natalie settled into life on the ranch. Marcus proved to be a quiet but kind man, a widower who had lost his wife to fever 3 years prior. He ran the ranch with efficient competence, clearly knowledgeable about every aspect of the horse business. He also made it clear, without saying it directly, that he would not pry into Natalie's reasons for being there, but would support Kane's decision to bring her. The ranch house had a spare room that Marcus offered to Natalie. It was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the pastures. After weeks of sleeping on the ground or in abandoned buildings, it felt like paradise. Natalie threw herself into learning the ranch work. She helped with feeding and grooming the horses, mended tack, cooked meals for the three of them, and gradually took on more complex tasks as her confidence grew. She discovered that she had a natural affinity for the animals, something Kane noticed and encouraged. "You are good at this," he told her one afternoon as they worked together to train a yearling. "Really good. Have you considered learning to ride properly, not just travel riding, but real horsemanship?" "I would like that," Natalie said, surprised to find she meant it. For the first time in her life, she was discovering what she enjoyed, rather than simply doing what was necessary to survive. As the weeks passed and autumn settled over Colorado in earnest, Kane and Natalie continued to grow closer. Their relationship deepened naturally, without rush or pressure. Kane courted her properly, taking her on rides through the valley, picking wildflowers for her, treating her with a respect and tenderness that made her heart ache in the best way. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Kane took her hand. "Natalie, there is something I need to ask you, but I want you to know there is no pressure. You can say no, and nothing will change between us." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about the future, about what I want my life to look like. The thing is, every time I picture it, you are there. Not as a guest or a helper, but as my partner, my wife, if you will have me." Kane turned to face her fully. "I know it has not been long since we met, and I know you have been through things that would make any woman cautious. But I love you, Natalie. I think I have loved you since that night at Garrett's ranch when you called out for help and trusted me enough to take the chance I offered. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Natalie's eyes, but these were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Kane. I will marry you. I love you too." Kane pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," Natalie whispered against his chest. They were married 3 weeks later in a small church in the nearby town. Marcus stood as witness, and a few of their neighbors attended, curious about Kane's bride but too polite to ask too many questions. Natalie wore a simple dress that Marcus's late wife had owned, altered to fit her with Marcus's blessing. She carried wildflowers from the valley, and when she walked down the aisle toward where Kane waited, she felt like she was finally, truly beginning her life. The winter that followed was the happiest time Natalie had ever known. She and Kane settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked side by side on the ranch, built up the horse herd, and made plans for the future. Kane proved to be a devoted husband, thoughtful and patient, passionate and protective. Marcus became like family, a gruff uncle figure who clearly approved of the match even if he rarely said so directly. In the spring of 1879, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, and excitement at the prospect of starting a family with Kane, but also fear, memories of her mother's difficult health, and the dangers that childbirth posed. Kane must have seen the fear in her eyes when she told him, because he immediately pulled her close. "We will get through this together," he said. "I will take care of you, and we will find the best doctor in the territory to attend the birth. You are strong, Natalie, stronger than you know." His confidence helped settle her nerves. Over the following months, as her belly swelled with new life, Kane was endlessly attentive. He took over the heavier ranch work, made sure she rested, even read to her in the evenings from a book of poems he had ordered from Denver. Their son was born in December of 1879, a healthy boy with Kane's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him Jacob Marcus Northfield, honoring Kane's grandfather and their friend and partner. Holding her son for the first time, Natalie felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her, along with a gratitude so deep it bordered on religious. This life, this family, this love, all of it had sprung from that desperate decision to trust a stranger in the moonlight. The years that followed were full and rich. Jacob grew into a bright, energetic child who loved the horses as much as his parents did. The ranch prospered under their careful management. gaining a reputation for quality stock. Kane and Natalie added to their family, welcoming a daughter they named Catherine in 1882 and another son, Robert, in 1884. Through it all, Natalie never forgot where she had come from or what she had escaped. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would think about her brother Thomas, wondering if he was all right, hoping that he had found his own way out of their father's shadow. She thought less often about her father himself, having made peace with the fact that some people were too broken to fix. In the spring of 1885, 7 years after Kane had helped her escape, Natalie received a letter that had been forwarded through several addresses before finding her. The handwriting was unfamiliar but careful, the words spelled out with obvious effort. "Dear sister," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I do not know if you will even remember me, as it has been so many years. This is Thomas, your brother. I am 19 now, and I have been looking for you for 2 years. I finally found someone who knew of Kane Northfield and his ranch in Colorado, and they told me how to write to you. I need you to know that I am all right. Father died 3 years ago. Drink finally killed him. I was sad but also relieved, which I suppose makes me a terrible person. I have been working as a stable hand and learning the trade. I am good with horses, you will be glad to know. I also need you to know that I never blamed you for leaving. I understood, even at 14. What Father tried to do was wrong, and you deserved to escape. I am just glad you found safety and, I hope, happiness. If you are willing, I would like to visit you. I would like to meet the man who saved my sister and see the life you have built. But if you do not want that, if you prefer to leave the past behind, I will understand. Your brother, always, Thomas Harper." Natalie read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Kane found her like that, sitting on the porch with the paper in her hands, and immediately knelt beside her chair. "What is wrong? What has happened?" "Nothing is wrong," Natalie said, laughing through her tears. "Everything is right. Kane, my brother is alive and well, and he wants to visit us. He wants to meet you and see our children." Kane read the letter himself, then smiled broadly. "Of course he should visit. Write him back today. Tell him he is welcome any time. Family is always welcome." Thomas arrived 6 weeks later, a tall young man with their father's build, but their mother's gentle eyes. The reunion was emotional, Natalie sobbing as she hugged her brother for the first time in 7 years. Thomas got along immediately with Kane, the 2 men discovering a shared passion for horses and an easy rapport. Over the course of his month-long visit, Thomas shared what he knew of their father's final years. Marcus Harper had never recovered from his poor choices, dying bitter and alone after Thomas had finally left to make his own way. Thomas spoke without rancor, having processed his complicated feelings about their father over the years. He was more interested in the future than the past. When Thomas announced his intention to return to his job, Kane and Natalie made him an offer. "Stay," Kane said. "Work with us here. We could use another good hand, and you are family. This is where you belong." Thomas accepted, and the ranch gained another partner. He proved to be an excellent horseman, confirming his claim to be good with the animals. More importantly, he fit seamlessly into their lives, becoming a beloved uncle to the children and a valued friend to both Kane and Marcus. The years continued to roll past, marked by the seasons and the steady rhythm of ranch life. More children came, 2 more daughters and another son, filling the house with noise and love. The ranch grew and thrived, becoming one of the most respected horse operations in Colorado. Kane and Natalie's love deepened with time, weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs together. They taught their children about hard work and integrity, about treating animals with respect and people with kindness. They built not just a ranch, but a legacy, something that would outlast them both. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Kane took Natalie riding up into the mountains, following trails they had explored together decades earlier. They stopped at a high meadow filled with autumn wildflowers, the same colors as the ones she had carried at their wedding. "Do you ever regret it?" Kane asked as they sat together on a blanket, watching their horses graze. "Leaving with me that night, taking such a risk?" Natalie looked at her husband, at the silver threading through his dark hair and the lines time had carved around his eyes, evidence of years spent squinting into the sun and laughing with their children. She thought about their life together, about the ranch and the family they had built, about the love that had grown from desperate trust into something deep and unshakable. Never, she said firmly. Not for a single moment. You gave me everything that night, Kane. My freedom, my life, my future. And then you gave me your heart, which was the greatest gift of all. Kane pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You gave me the same. I was just traveling through, before I met you. Moving from place to place with no real home. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. You made me whole. They sat together as the sun tracked across the sky, comfortable in the silence that only true partnership brings. Below them, the ranch spread out in miniature, smoke rising from the chimneys, horses dotting the pastures, their children visible as small figures moving about their chores. Tell me again, Natalie said softly, about that night, about what you were thinking when you heard me call out. Kane smiled, knowing this story well. They had told it to each other and to their children countless times over the years, but it never grew old. I was checking the stars, trying to judge the weather for the next day's travel. Then I heard your voice, so quiet I almost missed it. When I looked up and saw you in that window, I just knew I had to help. I did not think about the consequences or the risk. I just knew that whatever was happening to you was wrong, and I had the means to change it. And when you opened my door and saw me for the first time, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. You were terrified, I could see that, but you were willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. That takes courage most people do not have. I was not brave, I was desperate. Sometimes those are the same thing. Kane shifted so he could look at her directly. But Natalie, you were brave then, and you have been brave every day since. Brave enough to trust me, brave enough to build a new life, brave enough to open your heart again after everything you had been through. That is the truest kind of courage. Natalie felt the familiar prick of tears, happy tears that came easily after all these years. I love you, Kane Northfield. Thank you for saving me. I love you too, Kane replied. But Natalie, you need to understand something. I did not save you that night. I just gave you the chance to save yourself, and you took it. Everything that came after, everything we built together, that was you being strong and brave and refusing to let your father's choices define your life. You saved yourself. I just had the extraordinary privilege of being there to witness it. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children ran out to meet them. Jacob now, a young man of 20 helping run the ranch. The younger ones still in school, but eager to learn everything they could about the horses and the land. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner, the table filled with food and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a large family. Thomas was there with his new wife, a kind woman from town who fit perfectly into their extended family. Marcus, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, sat at the head of the table telling stories that had the children hanging on every word. Natalie looked around the table at all these faces she loved, at the life she and Kane had created together, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was what freedom looked like, she thought. Not just escape from a bad situation, but the ability to choose, to build, to love without fear. This was what Kane had given her when he helped her climb out that window, and this was what she had given him in return when she chose to trust him. After dinner, after the children had been put to bed and the house had grown quiet, Kane and Natalie stood together on the porch looking out at the stars. The Wyoming mountains were visible in the distance, the same mountains they had fled through all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Kane asked. "About how far we have come," Natalie said. "About how a single moment can change everything. If you had ridden past that ranch 1 hour earlier or later, if I had not called out, if you had not heard me, our whole lives would be different." "I do not believe in fate," Kane said. "But I believe that when good people find each other, when they choose to help each other and trust each other, extraordinary things can happen. We did choose each other, did we not? Even when we barely knew one another, we chose to take a chance." "Best choice I ever made," Kane said simply. They stood together in the starlight, holding hands and watching the night settle over the ranch, over their land, over the life they had built from hope and trust and love. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the sounds of horses settling for the night and the distant call of an owl. Natalie thought about the girl she had been, locked in that room and seeing no future beyond fear and despair. She thought about the moment she chose to call out to a stranger, to risk everything on the slim chance that someone might care enough to help. And she thought about the man who had answered, who had given up his safety and his plans to help someone he did not know. That single choice, made in moonlight and desperation, had bloomed into this: a family, a ranch, a love that had weathered 20 years and would weather 20 more, a legacy that would outlive them both. It was more than she ever could have imagined on that terrible night when her father sold her for horses and supplies. But Kane had given him double and set her free forever, and in that freedom, they had found each other. They had found home. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down to children and grandchildren in the years that followed. It was a story about courage and kindness, about how one person's choice to help could change lives forever. But more than that, it was a love story, the tale of two people who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful together. Jacob eventually took over running the ranch with his siblings, all of them sharing their parents' gift with horses. Thomas married and had children of his own, becoming as much a part of the Northfield family as if he had been born into it. Marcus lived to see his 80th birthday, passing peacefully in his sleep with Kane and Natalie at his side, having long since become more family than business partner. Kane and Natalie grew old together, their hair silver, and their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They never lost the spark between them, that connection forged in moonlight and sealed with trust. They rode together into the mountains every year on their anniversary, returning to that high meadow to remember and celebrate. When Kane passed away in his sleep at the age of 72, Natalie mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been given 46 years together, years filled with love and purpose and joy. She lived another 5 years after his death, surrounded by children and grandchildren who all carried pieces of the legacy she and Kane had built. On her final day, weak with age but clear-minded to the end, Natalie called her children to her bedside. She wanted to tell them one more time about the night she met their father, about the choice that changed everything. He could have ridden past, she said, her voice thin but steady. He could have decided it was too risky or too complicated, but he did not. He chose kindness, and that kindness became love, and that love became all of you. Remember that. Remember that one choice, one moment of courage or compassion can change the world. Jacob held her hand. Tell us again how you knew you could trust him. Natalie smiled, her eyes distant with memory. I looked into his eyes, and I saw someone who understood that people are not property. I saw someone who believed in freedom and dignity. I saw someone worth taking a chance on. Her eyes refocused on her children's faces. And I was right. Your father was the best man I ever knew. He gave me everything, and I gave him everything in return. And together we made something neither of us could have built alone. She passed peacefully that night, slipping away in her sleep. They buried her beside Kane on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under the wide Colorado sky they had both loved. The headstones were simple, marking the resting place of Kane Northfield and Natalie Northfield, beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, partners in life and business. But the story did not end there. The ranch continued, passed down through generations, each one adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation that Kane and Natalie had built. Their descendants spread across the West, carrying with them the values their ancestors had lived by: hard work, integrity, compassion, and above all, the belief that people deserve dignity and choice. The tale of how Kane gave Garrett double what he paid for Natalie and set her free became a touchstone for the family, a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult or dangerous, is always worth it. It was a story about love, yes, but also about justice and freedom and the simple human decency of recognizing that some transactions are inherently wrong, no matter what the law or custom might say. In the end, it was not just a story about two people finding each other. It was a story about what happens when courage meets compassion, when someone with means chooses to use them for good, when a woman brave enough to call out for help meets a man brave enough to answer. It was a story about the family they built and the values they passed on, about roots that went deep into Colorado soil and branches that spread wide across generations. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, but timeless in its message, that freedom is precious, that love is powerful, and that sometimes the most important moment of your life arrives without warning in the form of a stranger who chooses, against all odds and sense, to help. The ranch still stands today, run by Kane and Natalie's great-great-grandchildren, who know the story by heart and tell it to their own children. When they do, they always end it the same way. She was traded for horses and supplies, the cowboy gave them double and set her free forever. And from that freedom came everything good in our family's history. Remember that. Remember where we came from. Remember that love and courage can change the world. And so, the story lives on, a testament to two people who found each other in darkness and built a life in light, who chose each other every day for decades, who proved that the best love stories are the ones built on respect and trust and the deep understanding that every person deserves the freedom to choose their own path. Kane Northfield and Natalie Harper. Northfield, horse traders and ranchers, husband and wife, partners and best friends, lived and loved and left behind a legacy that could never be measured in horses or supplies or any material thing, but only in the hearts of those who came after, who knew their story and understood its power. They were two people who met by chance and stayed together by choice, building something beautiful from desperate circumstances, proving that sometimes the greatest acts of love begin with the simplest acts of kindness. Their story was one of freedom gained and love found, of a family built and a legacy created, all because one night a woman was brave enough to ask for help and a man was brave enough to give it, no questions asked and no payment required beyond the chance to walk through life together, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever free.